Hello, my name is Helen Christians, and I will be your MC this morning. Welcome to the Humanists of Greater Portland Sunday morning meeting. I want to welcome those folks who are joining us through Zoom and those attending in person at Friendly House. HGP's AV team is able to bring us all together this morning, and we appreciate their excellent service to our organization. We couldn't do it without you. Thanks, Mike and Dave and Jeff and anyone else on that team. You guys are amazing. The Humanists of Greater Portland is a chapter of the American Humanist Association. Humanism is an outlook or system of thought attaching primary importance to human experiences rather than supernatural beliefs. Humanists value the worth and goodness of all human beings and seek to find common values and respect among people. Humanists stay curious and open as they seek rational ways to solve problems by listening to others and speaking their own truth, to find equitable solutions through science, reason, and free inquiry. For this morning's reading, we have a royal guest. His Majesty King Dave will be giving his recommendations for a better America. Welcome, King Dave.
His Majesty King Dave first appeared at Humanists of Greater Portland following Donald Trump's election as president to provide some sort of nonpartisan alternative to bring up ideas. And His Majesty, this morning, His Majesty is upset about the Supreme Court's decision to allow states to ban abortions. Do they think women impregnate themselves? Do they not consider that babies grow up to do both good things and bad things? To teach and to build things, to also to do drugs and to storm the Capitol. Men, not women, determine pregnancy. In biblical language, men beget children. Women simply bear children. If women could stay 6 feet away from men, they wouldn't be impregnated and need an abortion. Sex education materials say that babies start to form when sperm meets the egg. They usually don't say that a man is responsible for placing the sperm so it can meet the egg. Mississippi leads the nation in child poverty. Every time a man fathers a child into poverty, it drags the community down. Last year, John Seegers told the Humanists of Greater Portland that there were more unwanted children born in the U.S. than illegal immigrants. By banning abortion, do they think it's still the 1850s and they can sell those babies for profit? Almost every day we hear about women's reproductive rights. His Majesty wants to start hearing about men's reproductive responsibilities. To get out of this mess, we need to do two things. Use DNA and science to accurately identify the biological father of every child born and every fetus aborted, and provide free contraception to any woman who requests it, no questions asked, including health clinics in schools. In a 1982 movie, Dolly Parton ran The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. Red state legislators are now competing against each other to have the biggest open free brothel in the industrialized world. Have a good week.
Thank you, Your Majesty. Your views are always welcome here. Thank you. I would now like to welcome today's speaker. Dr. Abby Hafer comes to us from Bedford, Massachusetts, where she is a professor of anatomy and physiology at Curry College. Dr. Hafer is particularly interested in areas where biology intersect with politics and public policy. Her book, Debunking Intelligent Design, The Not So Intelligent Designer, Why Evolution Explains the Human Body and Intelligent Design Does Not, became a #1 bestseller on Amazon in the category of theism, which Dr. Hafer finds quite ironic. She also has co-written the book Darwin's Apostles, The Men Who Fought to Have Evolution Accepted, Their Times, and How the Battle Continues. She wrote this with Dr. David Ornstein. Her public speaking has taken Dr. Hafer all over the United States, and she has given many TV podcasts and radio interviews, including appearances on NPR. Her scientific career includes a doctorate in zoology from Oxford University, many research projects in physiology, and a stint monitoring fish population in the Bering Sea. That was a brave, brave undertaking. She has written numerous articles and book chapters. Most recently, she has written about both vaccines and abortion for the law journal, The Lawyer's Daily, and about abortion for Only Sky. It is her topic today is everything you need to that you know about sex is wrong. Part one, the gender binary. Welcome, Dr. Hafer. We so appreciate your willingness to speak to us today. Come on in.
In the beginning, it was Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. I don't know if you heard that old bad excuse for homophobia when you were growing up, but I did. There's just one problem with that, and it's this. It's wrong in every possible way. It's stupid. There's absolutely nothing correct about that statement. So let's just start again, and I'll do it right this time. In the beginning, there was one sex, and it was female. An individual reproduced by growing a copy of herself and releasing that copy into the environment. This was certainly the case with the first self-copying molecule. And since life began with the first self-copying molecule, this means that females are the first original sex. Let that sink in for a while. In the beginning, it wasn't Adam and Eve. It was Eve. In the beginning, it wasn't this. It was this. Now, this is a picture of bacteria replicating, that is to say, copying themselves. And bacteria came along well after that first self-copying molecule. But individual molecules don't photograph very well, so I'm showing you bacteria because bacteria are still pretty ancient. So Eve, that first self-copying organism, made copies of herself, and those copies made more copies and more copies and more copies, and sometimes those copies had mutations. So in biblical terms, Eve begat Eve, and Eve and Eve and Eve, and one of those Eves had a mutation, that is to say, a slight genetic change, and begat a line of Evelyns. Some of these mutated further and begat lines of Ediths and Ednas. Meanwhile, the Eves were still busy begetting more Eves, but some of those mutated and became Esmes and Esmeraldas. So the first family didn't look like this, but more like this. So females were really doing pretty well before males came along. Thank you very much. The problems began when Eve's daughters, let's call them Edith and Esmeralda, started competing with each other. And thus was the evolutionary arms race begun. The problem was made worse by the fact that Edith continued to mutate and got new advantages over Esmeralda. Meanwhile, poor Esmeralda didn't always mutate fast enough to keep up. Many lines of Esmeraldas were wiped out because of this, and that was the end of their evolutionary line. But then a mutation took place that allowed some Esmeraldas to swap genes with other members of the population, members who were not Esmeraldas. And this gene swapping saved the day. That's because some of these newly acquired genes allowed the new Esmeraldas to compete successfully with that pesky Edith. The new Esmeralda was no longer a pure Esmeralda, it was true, but by golly, she was alive. So the new, improved Esmeraldas got ahead in the evolutionary arms race. And it was good. And that, folks, is how sex was born. And it was good. According to evolutionary biologist W.D. Hamilton, one major benefit that sexual reproduction gives us is the ability to stay ahead of parasites. Parasites work by adapting very precisely to a very specific host species. The only potential hosts that are likely to survive are those that have the ability to mix their genetics quickly through sexual reproduction and spread beneficial mutations through the population quickly, also by sexual reproduction. Other biologists have also suggested that the gene exchange done by sexual reproduction also means that siblings are not exact copies of one another and therefore less likely to compete directly with one another for survival. But one way or another, that's what males are for. Males are genetic mixers. They speed up evolutionary change. Since a male's genes can only survive by contributing to somebody else's reproduction, males have evolved a wide variety of mechanisms for trying to persuade a female to mate with them. There's showing off. Everybody knows about peacocks using their tails to show off and try to attract mates. But did you know about Technicolor vomit? Crustaceans called ostracods vomit luminous mucus in order to attract mates. Isn't that sexy? There's also showering females with gifts. Humans do this. Did you know that bowerbirds do too? Here's a male bowerbird making a really showy nest in order to attract a female. Here's the finished product. There's also trapping females. Trapping isn't pretty, but evolution isn't pretty. There's growing longer penises than the competition. This is what barnacles do. Barnacles are stationary as adults, so getting sperm to the nearest female is a challenge for male barnacles. They also have to compete with each other over this. They are up to the challenge. Barnacles can grow penises up to 8 times the length of their own bodies. Barnacles have the longest penises in the world, compared to their body length anyway. Remember this the next time that somebody brags about the size of theirs. So, I've explained why sexual reproduction is useful. Let's move on to the whole question of what is natural. The cartoon here, of course, depicts unnatural acts with a sheep. This brings up a really important point. People will spend a whole lot of time telling you what kind of sex is natural and what kind of sex is unnatural according to them. But you have just learned that sexual reproduction exists as a means of genetic mixing. That's all it is. This genetic mixing does not require a specific set of gender or sexual characteristics. So I'm going to state a bunch of mistaken assumptions that people have about sex and gender, and then take a look at males and females throughout the animal kingdom. You will see how brilliantly creative evolution by natural selection can be and how diverse the results are in the animal kingdom. There's no one set of rules. Sexuality is a free-for-all. You will also begin to notice how many of these mistaken assumptions are based on some humans' wishful thinking, usually about what they would like to see in their own human society. So, mistaken assumption number 1. Evolution means that males will have no parental involvement and will leave care of the infants and children to females, right? Wrong. Here's just one example. Emus, those big flightless birds from Australia. Once the eggs are laid, the male emu is the one who takes care of the eggs and incubates them. Once the eggs hatch, the male raises the chicks. Mistaken assumption number 2. Evolution means that males will always be bigger than females and will dominate them, right? Wrong. Here is a picture of an anglerfish, which is actually a picture of 3 anglerfish. Male anglerfish are tiny compared to females. To continue their existence past a certain age, a male anglerfish must attach himself to a female and fuse his body with hers. This female anglerfish has two attached males. In the biological sciences, having different sexes of different sizes is called sexual dimorphism. You can tell that the people who invented this term were men, since the term sexual dimorphism is defined as males being bigger than females. When the females of a species are larger than the males, this is called reverse sexual dimorphism. In other words, human male biologists just assumed that males being bigger than females was the natural state of being. Mistaken assumption number 3. But males are at least always the ones with Y chromosomes, right? Wrong. Birds. All birds. All male birds have two X chromosomes. It's the females who have the Y chromosomes. This is true for some male insects like moths and butterflies as well, and some crustaceans and some reptiles, including the huge lizards called Komodo dragons. It's called the ZW system instead of the XY system, but that's just to make it easier for people to talk about it. Mistaken assumption number 4. Females and males have separate bodies, right? Wrong. Many animals are hermaphrodites. That is, they have both male and female reproductive organs. Most snails are hermaphrodites. So are many jellyfish and many worms. Mistaken assumption number 5. But male input is always required for reproduction, right? No. Bonnet-head sharks, black-tip sharks, leopard sharks, zebra sharks, small white-spotted bamboo sharks, many snakes, including boa constrictors, a brand new all-female species of crayfish, and 50 species of lizards, including Komodo dragons, can all reproduce without males. Mistaken assumption number 6. But we always see pictures from the Bible of animals being saved from Noah's flood by going onto a boat 2 by 2. One female and one male. That's what's natural, right? 2 by 2, one female and one male, right? Wrong. First, many species have some male homosexual individuals. For instance, rams. Yes, rams, that very symbol of raging male horniness. Rams are male sheep, and about 8% of all rams form exclusively male-to-male pair bonds, forsaking all contact with female sheep. Some animals routinely practice lesbianism. For instance, this species of albatross has many same-sex female pairs who nest and raise chicks together. Some animals form trios, and some of those trios are for child rearing. For instance, these skuas. Skuas often nest as mixed-sex trios and raise chicks together. And some trios are for sex. This is a North Atlantic right whale. And this is a photograph of a female North Atlantic right whale having simultaneous sex with 2 males at once. And when I say simultaneous, I mean simultaneous. That, by the way, is an example of a multi-male breeding system where each female may have many male partners. For something more biblical, there are also multi-female breeding systems. That is, where one male may have many female partners. For instance, northern fur seals. This is a male northern fur seal with its many females, just like the Old Testament. But what about primates, our near relatives in the animal kingdom? Well, it turns out that our fellow primates have all different kinds of breeding systems. Here's a graph for you. This graph shows that some species of our fellow primates have multi-male breeding systems. Those are the solid dots on this graph. Some have multi-female breeding systems. Those are the open triangles. And some have monogamous breeding systems. Those are the open circles. As for humans, we are the little plus sign near the upper right. This graph, by the way, is a plot of testicle weight versus body weight in primates. Somebody checked to see if there was a correlation between that ratio and mating systems, but the results were not clear. You should know that homosexuality, lesbianism, and bisexuality are all found within non-human primates as well. Mistaken assumption number 7. But at least males are males and females are females, right? None of this cross-dressing or transsexual stuff, right? Wrong. Transsexual fish are common. First, barramundi. These fish transition from male to female. Most individuals mature as males. They become female after one or more spawning seasons. Most of the larger specimens are therefore female. Second, blue gropers. These change from female to male. This is a blue groper female. That's correct, it's not blue. It's the males that are blue. Blue gropers are a type of wrasse. Wrasses are famous for changing their sex, usually female to male. All blue gropers begin life as females. This is a blue groper male. Here's how you get a blue groper male. Usually you will find only 1 or 2 male blue gropers in an area and a larger number of female gropers in the same area. Then, when the dominant male dies, the largest female grows, changes color and sex, and becomes the dominant male. Third, clownfish. These change from whatever to male or female. Yes, Nemo himself was gender fluid. Clownfish start life with no functioning gonads. They are neither sex. There's one breeding pair with a large female, a smaller male, and a bunch of non-sexual or sometimes male smaller individuals. If the female dies, then the male becomes female. If the male dies, then the largest non-breeding fish becomes male. Fourth, dwarf hawkfish. These are even more gender fluid. Hawkfish live in harems with one dominant male mating with several females. When it comes to sex change, the size of the harem matters. Listen carefully now because the plot to this is worse than a soap opera. If a male hawkfish takes on too many females, then one of the largest females will change sex, become male, and take over half the harem. But if that new male hawkfish loses a few females to other harems and is challenged by a larger male, then it goes back to being female. That way it doesn't lose precious energy fighting a losing battle. So the ability to change sex in both directions maximizes an individual's ability to reproduce. So gender fluidity is the name of the game for many species. Mistaken assumption number 8. Okay, so it is clear that nature does not define sex roles, and it is clear that gender fluidity is real. But at least there are 2 sexes, right? I mean, at most 2, maybe 1.5 or 1, but 2 at most, right? Wrong again. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Tetrahymena thermophila, the organism with the most creative sex life that I know about. It has 7 sexes. You heard me, 7. No wonder it's one of my favorite organisms. This single-celled creature, which has been thoroughly studied by biologist Eduardo Arias, mostly reproduces without sex, dividing into two identical daughter cells. That's Eve begetting Eve again. But when food is scarce, the creature can opt for sexual reproduction, which, as I told you before, creates novel genetic combinations that may give daughter cells a better chance of surviving in a harsh environment. Such tough conditions also rewarded the creatures when they developed more sexes because it gave them more mating opportunities. After all, if you only have two sexes, there's only a 50% chance that someone you meet will be of the right type. But with 7 different sexes, a creature's chance of meeting Miss Right or Mr. Right increases to about 85%. 85% is bigger than 50%, so 7 sexes wins. So, Tetrahymena thermophila is the swingingest creature I know about. So, I think I've done a pretty good job of destroying what is called the argument from nature. There is no such thing as an unnatural gender role. Anytime a religion or anybody else says that non-heterosexual sex is wrong because it is unnatural, it is clear that they are making things up. It's clear that we should not make assumptions about naturalness or unnaturalness or any given gender role or gender fluidity. We cannot use the excuse of what is natural as an excuse for the bad treatment of women or men or anybody in the LGBT community. So let's move on to the supernatural. Let's talk about morality. The philosopher John Loftus has proposed what he calls the outsider test of faith. In this test, he says that people of all faiths should be as skeptical about the supernatural claims of their own faith as they are about the supernatural claims of other faiths. That is, if you are inside a faith, you should be as skeptical as you would be if you were outside it. For instance, let's suppose that you are skeptical about the ancient Greeks' claim that every day the god Helios harnesses his 4-horse chariot and so moves the sun across the sky. You think that the evidence for this is not very strong, even though many people who claimed to know these things thought it was true and wrote about it at the time. According to the outsider test of faith, if you are skeptical about Helios, then you should be equally skeptical about the claim that the Judeo-Christian God created Adam and Eve as the first humans. If there is no objective evidence for Adam and Eve that is better than the evidence for Helios and his 4-horse chariot, then you need to doubt the supernatural claims of your faith. That's the outsider test of faith. I wish to propose a new test, a test for morality. Think of it as being like an outsider test of morality. It's similar to the outsider test of faith. In this test, you must justify your moral code, but not use any claim of the supernatural in order to do so. Why? Because the evidence for your supernatural being is no better than the evidence for anybody else's supernatural being. If you won't believe in Helios, then nobody else is under any obligation to believe in your god or goddesses. So all claims of morality based on the sayings or commands of gods or goddesses and claims of morality based on holy books all fail this test. If you can justify your morality without referring to the supernatural, then you have at least started on the road towards a good moral code. This outsider test of morality may also be called the non-supernatural test of morality. I think it's a good test. It's a tough test, but not an impossible one. And keep in mind that it is only the beginning of developing a good moral code. It's a necessary first step. Let's see how this works out based on examples from real life. First, from my home state of Massachusetts, the Salem witch trials. In these infamous cases, innocent people were put to death by the Puritans after having been convicted of witchcraft. These clearly fail the non-supernatural test of morality. Without reference to the supernatural, there is no case against the women and men who were hanged. These convictions for witchcraft make no sense because they clearly fail the outsider test for morality. This is also interesting because there are two institutions that descend from the Puritan Church. They are the Congregational Church and the Unitarian Universalist Church. Neither of these institutions would dream of doing something so irrational and hateful today. This goes to show that it's a good idea for religions to revise their thinking from time to time. Sometimes religions like to claim that they deal in timeless truths, but actually, all religions do revise their tenets from time to time. It's just that some religions are more honest about this than others. I have some personal interest in this case. Some of my ancestors were Puritans and were living in Salem at the time. Some of them were among the people who allowed the madness to happen. I am very glad that the faith and morality of my ancestors has been revised and improved. I do not consider our modern society to be less moral than that earlier one. I consider it to be more moral. Next, Jewish dietary laws. These pass the non-supernatural test of morality. Why? Because no harm is done. And if people wish to express their cultural affiliation in this way, then that is their choice. Following these laws because they are written in a holy book doesn't make someone a better person for following them, but it doesn't make them a worse one either. Next, helping the poor because your religion tells you to. This passes the non-supernatural test of morality. The action is good, and the motivation is, in this case, irrelevant. So now we get to recent history. On June 12, 2016, an armed man killed 49 people and wounded another 53 people in a terrorist attack on a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida, called Pulse. The murderer claimed that he was inspired by the Islamic State. Is the Islamic State anti-gay? Why, yes, it is. What's more, during the months that led up to the shooting, the United States had been treated to a whole series of so-called bathroom bills. These bills require transsexual people to use the public bathrooms that match their original birth gender, regardless of their current gender identity. However, that's only the tip of the iceberg. For example, in North Carolina's infamous bathroom bill, we heard about trans people and bathrooms, but that bill also allowed employment discrimination based on sexual orientation. It allowed discrimination against LGBT customers. It allowed discrimination against LGBT people in accommodations. And it said that no city or locality could enact laws preventing these types of discrimination. Although some Christians opposed these bathroom bills, many others supported this type of discrimination against LGBT people, and they did so in the name of their God. Here's a quote from one. I believe that God got it right in Genesis 5:2 when he made them male and female. If God didn't give you access to a male or female bathroom via your anatomy, neither should we give you access via ordinance or legislation, period. And that was spoken in the chamber of the North Carolina legislature in 2016. This guy quoted here is claiming to speak for God. He is also using a so-called holy book to justify his bigotry. This is just one example. And this was the political atmosphere in the United States just prior to the Pulse nightclub shooting. So we have Christians who claim to speak for a supernatural entity when they say that LGBT folks are bad. We have Islamists shooting people because of a so-called holy book that claims to speak for a supernatural entity. Here's a clue. Nobody can honestly speak for a supernatural entity. That includes all the people who wrote the so-called holy books. If shooting someone is bad, then shooting someone is bad, period. If you try to excuse it by referring to a so-called holy book, it is still bad. A so-called holy book is no excuse for bad behavior. Any so-called word of God cannot be used morally to justify bad actions. But here's my most important point. Most people already accept the non-supernatural test of morality. Even most people who believe in the supernatural already accept the non-supernatural test of morality. How do I know this? Consider the Bible. In it, there are numerous references to slavery, to selling your children, to rape, and to genocide. The Bible does not condemn any of these heinous practices. The 10 Commandments are silent on all these subjects, with the exception of killing. However, even with killing, God tells the Israelites to kill all the Canaanites, every man, woman, and child. That is, God tells them to commit genocide, and they do. Then the Bible acts like that's okay because a supernatural being said that it was okay. Now you know why I don't trust the word of supernatural beings, and I especially don't trust the word of people who claim to speak for them. Most other people don't trust them either. Allow me to demonstrate this to you. If I ask a fundamentalist of any stripe if they would kill me if God told them to, the honest ones will say yes, they would kill me if God told them to. On the other hand, if God tells me to kill them, I won't do it. So my question to you is this: who would you rather sit next to on a public bus? You can see from this that we have already entered the world of the non-supernatural test of morality. We like the non-supernatural test of morality. The non-supernatural test of morality is what most people already use, whether they admit it or not. In addition, most people today would say that slavery, selling your children, rape, and genocide are all immoral, even though the Bible says that these things are all okay. Again, we have already entered the world of the non-supernatural test of morality, and it's a better world. In this better world, no one has any divine rights. Men don't have God-given dominion over women. Humans don't have God-given dominion over anything. We are responsible for figuring things out. Sex is a matter of informed consent. Marriage is acknowledged as a human invention. We recognize that sometimes bad luck is just bad luck. There is no divine justice. There is no karma. This life is the only one that matters. We must love and comfort each other. And finally, this planet and all its life is ours to protect. This is important. We can understand the consequences of our actions, and we must act that way. No God will save us. No God will save the planet. The earth and the living things on it are holy. That is, they are worthy of supreme respect. Not because they are supernatural, but because they are life. And that is amazing and precious enough. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that wonderful tour through the living world. And the answer to the question, when does life begin? A couple of billion years ago, apparently. I'm a psychologist by profession, and I hardly dare to broach this question because I'm being recorded, and who knows what will end up somewhere on the internet. But I have really puzzled about this, and I wonder your thoughts, because one of the things that you used was transgender, where the descriptions all seem to be transsexual, that bodies literally changed sex organs. Now, that doesn't seem to be what's going on with humans. Humans seem to have this experience of, I'm not in the right body. This seems to me to be tied inevitably to our system of language, which seems to be pretty peculiar to us. So the analogies, the examples that you give, do you really think that they are on point with this issue of sensing that you're not in the right body?
Great question.
Well, that's a wonderful question, but a very deep one. And I mean, I'm going to start just by saying that obviously we can't really get inside the heads of fish, so I cannot comment on it in that regard. And you are quite right that, the fish and the other things literally can change how they reproduce and how they present and all of that. And of course, humans are finding out ways to change their presentation. And I'm going to go a little bit off topic here, because there's another fun aspect of zoology that I didn't mention in this because I have to limit my time at times. And that is that there is such a thing as as an animal changing its gender presentation. That happens as well. Again, there are some fish where basically there will be sort of, big tough male fish that are guarding female fish. But then there will be little male fish that assume the coloration of females and kind of sneak in so that they can mate with the females without being detected by the large aggressive males. So, as I said, we do get these examples of change of what humans would call gender presentation. And as I said, none of us can comment on what's going on in the head of a human, in the head of an animal. I don't quite know how to address your question otherwise. I mean, you are a psychologist. You have more experience than I do of people who just feel that they are somehow in the wrong body. And I have occasionally pondered if this is because we have such strong ideas in our culture as to how males and females should present. But it doesn't seem to be just that. I mean, I know one guy who is very happily presenting as a male, but who likes wearing frilly dresses. So in that case, you know, he's fine with being male, but likes to do the sort of the female presentation thing from time to time and is not in conflict about that. But then there are others who just really, truly feel that they are in the wrong body and want to be seen. If they were born male or assigned male, they just really, truly feel that they are and should be seen as female. And, you know, in that case, they usually don't get to change their reproductive organs except with a great deal of surgery, though a lot of other presentation does change with hormones, as you know.
Right. But again, these are all human interventions to help us have the thing that we want.
Right.
And I'm not so much against people having what they want, but it's hard to find an equivalent elsewhere in nature.
Well, that we know of. I mean, the problem is we really can't figure out what animals are thinking. I mean, this is actually one of my arguments about God and about holy books that I didn't quite get into this time, but is basically, I do not have ESP. I cannot read anybody's mind. I cannot crawl around in your head and figure out what you're really thinking. I can, you know, make my best guesses. And, you know, sometimes I may have an idea of what you're thinking about because, you know, I know you well, or I read your face or whatever. But really and truly, honestly, I cannot crawl into anybody else's head. And that's just with humans. And the idea that any human could crawl around in God's mind is just ridiculous. We don't even have the ability to read each other's minds, much less God's mind. So, as I said, that I think is actually one of the strongest arguments against any holy book or any commandment from God, is that even if there is a God, we don't know what God's thinking, and we'd be better off admitting it.
Yeah.
There's no way.
Well, thank you so much. I've greatly appreciated what you've had to say. And
Mike, can you come on now and ask your question?
But you know, getting around about crawling around in God's head and know what he's doing. I'm saying that a lot of these heinous acts committed against the LGBT crowd are from people, you know, who put on display their own piety of why they're doing it, but deep beneath there is more this feeling that they need to dominate somebody, or they need to be able to have what I would call a false sense of empowerment in what they're doing over somebody else. It's basically a dominance game, and there's no morality behind it at all.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of dominance displays in a lot of that stuff. I mean, I think also just, you know, a discomfort with the unknown, which then gets translated into aggression, but that's not an excuse for it. I mean, I'm thinking about the first time that I went into a gay bar, or I should say a gay and lesbian bar back in like the 70s. And I remember it's like, okay, I'm going in, but if anybody hits on me, I don't know what I'm going to do. And the answer was everybody was dancing and having a great time, and I loved it. And I'm heterosexual, so it's not like I was going in there to try and find anybody. It was just some friends took me along. But, you know, there is just this fear of the unknown. And I'm sure that that's part of it as well. And actually, the part that I find very, very sad, and think about this, is that all these folks who are doing these, you know, very brutal or domineering displays of piety by being so anti-LGBT, you know, they've got family members who are LGBT.
Everybody.
I mean, I guarantee it, unless they have no relatives whatsoever. It's like, do the math. What's the sort of ratio according to research? Like, you know, what is it? 20% of the population or 10% of the population is going to be gay or bi or something like that. So it's like, think of your relatives, think of your children.
Yeah.
One of them is probably an LGBT person, and those poor kids, if they are kids, are busy being terrorized every minute that they're growing up.
Yeah, I've got two transgender nephews from my sister, and they're from female to male, and
Mhm.
just a couple of really good guys and all that. But yeah, they've got their things to deal with in society.
Oh, yeah.
Ale Christians has a question. Ale, go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, you spoke about that sexuality is a matter of informed choice, and that all sounds pretty wonderful. We have in I guess, mentioned several places in the founding documents of humanism that we believe in things that are validated by consequences. And it's observed in, I guess, in the United States that a consequence of polygamy is a lot of abuse of women. And so we outlaw polygamy, but that's an informed choice, perhaps. And a lot of people would argue that it should be, and so on. So this is kind of a conflict. And, there may be a lot of things that would work pretty well if a bunch of other cultural conventions, customs, etc., were changed at the same time as you made it illegal, etc. But it's impossible to change 9 things at once in the United States. We all know that. So how in the world do you reconcile this sort of apparent conflict between validated by consequences and informed choice?
Well, that's actually a really good question. And part of it has to do with, to use the obvious example of Mormons, the genders are not equal. They are not treated equally. And so I think there's a very good argument to be made that it is not informed consent, right, with emphasis on the consent here. Because if women don't have a whole lot of other choices, that's not really consent. There is a movement in this country towards what's called ethical non-monogamy. But that requires, everyone being an adult, having reasonable mental capacity, having equal rights, and to a degree having, equal access to that which you need to get by. Equal access to employment and money and housing and all of this kind of thing, because if you don't have those, you can't really make a free decision.
Let's see, Joyce, come on in. You have a question.
Actually, I think you just started to answer it.
Well,
my question was, what would a free society without artificial sexual restriction look like? And I started this question thinking about so much of our fear, so many of our rules are based on fear, and humans' desire for order, which is also based on fear, because what would it look like if we didn't have any order? And so maybe you already answered it. I mean, that movement toward an ethical non-monogamy I had not heard of before, but maybe that's part of how you get there, or do you ever get there?
Well, I'm kind of a fan of order myself. There's not a whole lot I can get done if things aren't reasonably orderly, and I tend to get nervous if everything is in chaos. But I think that there are ways of creating, the comfortable kind of order, and I'm using order in the comfortable sense here, that do not restrict people as much. I mean, I still think you really need to restrict people's behavior in terms of ethics. You can't abuse other people. You can't take advantage of ignorance. And ignorance can include just being too darn young to know enough. But yeah, but that it is, I'm guessing it's going to be, if it happens at all, kind of a stepwise, careful feeling our way along kind of process of trying to figure out how relationships can be constructed such that they are beneficial, rather than abusive. And, a lot of heterosexual couples do pretty well that way. And a lot of gay and lesbian couples do pretty well that way. But, there are also people who decide that, they're happy with their couplehood, but, it feels a little constraining and maybe they see other people. And then the question becomes, well, how do those other people feel about it? Are those other people being informed? And is the person's primary partner really happy with it or only putting up with it? And there are all kinds of very difficult questions that go into it and lots of things that are not comfortable. But I still think, that let's just say we have room for improvement. There's a lot we can do. And I think that probably over time, if things go well, we will see, as I said, more moves toward ethical non-monogamy, because, if it makes people happier and doesn't harm people and doesn't create complete chaos, then overall it's a win.
Just how to get there.
It's a lot to ask, I know.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Dave Gray at Friendly House has a question. Come on in on the mic, Dave Gray.
Yes, I'm looking at the brief summary of your presentation on our website, and it says the second phrase is, why does sex exist? For me, you didn't directly answer that question, but you did make it clear that sex is not necessary for reproduction, because all the single-celled creatures reproduce the same sex that they were. Eve's made another Eve, and Eve. Of course, there is research which says that those single-celled creatures were actually atoms and made atoms after atoms. So eventually a second sex was created. Evolution allowed that. Why? I think it's
genetic mixing.
I think the answer is kind of obvious. It's for pleasure.
Well,
That's
I'm
my
not.
comment.
I'm not sure. Again, not being able to crawl around in the heads of single-celled organisms, I couldn't tell you whether they experience pleasure or not. But I can. But as I said in my talk, what sexual reproduction does is that it does genetic mixing so that evolution happens more quickly, and this is actually incredibly powerful. Getting into sort of evolutionary theory and so on, for a long time, people did kind of wonder why sexual reproduction exists, because in an all-female species, just creating more clones of yourself, as happens, for instance, with this all-female species of crayfish, which is new to the scene. They don't waste any energy making non-reproducing individuals. It's actually very powerful. They are reproducing all over the place. So in fact, not having sexual reproduction is very powerful, but what it is not is terribly flexible. Because although mutations can take place, mutations all happen in separate lines. So maybe you have a mutation in this line, but not in this line. This line will never get it. And maybe you need 2 or 3 beneficial mutations to deal with some, environmental challenge or some new predator or whatever the case may be, or to take advantage of a different food source. If you need 3 separate mutations and they all have to happen on the same line because it's an all-female species, you may never get there. But if you have sexually reproducing species, and you have a line here and a line here and a line here, and you get a mutation here and a mutation here and a different mutation here, and they all cross because they are having sexual reproduction, it means that in 2 or 3 generations, you are going to wind up with a huge genetic mix, so that some of those genetic mixtures probably won't be very successful, but others of them will in fact be just what is needed for the current environmental challenges. So in fact, having a lot of genetic diversity makes a population much more robust. So as I said, so sexual reproduction very, very much has an evolutionary advantage in many cases. In fact, it's the kind of thing where it's by and large thought that all female species, eventually wind up collapsing because they can't adjust fast enough to some environmental challenge, whether it's a food source going away or a new predator or whatever the case may be. The question there, however, is how long does it take? So for instance, right now, as I said, there's this brand new or relatively new all-female species of crayfish, and it is reproducing to beat the band. It's incredibly successful. It's successful to the point of being invasive on several continents. And it hasn't collapsed yet. The question biologists are asking is, will it collapse in 10 years, 100 years, 100,000 years? We don't know. The experiment is being done right before our very eyes.
Well, now you have very thoroughly answered that question. Why does sex exist? And it was quite a bit more scientific than my idea.
Thanks, Dave. Renee, Jules, you have a question. Come on in.
First of all, I have the utmost respect for your presentation and the objectivity that you brought to the science of the biology of sex. Okay. My question to you is, as Mike brought forward, he has 2 nephews who are trans. Yeah, so where in the biology, if you look at embryology, the Malarian duck is going through its process of development. And at some point, it diverges to male or female, where in fact, most of us should have been, I think, females. I don't know, it goes back a long time, having embryology in the 1950s. And yet it sort of evens out. But where in your educational guess, does the biology change? So somebody who presents as a male and then says innately, I'm not a male, I'm a female, is there real concrete anatomical genetic imprinting, any number of things that would make that thing manifest itself? Why is it happening? The word trans to me is new. I mean, it's been there, but it's now in front and center. We never heard of trans before in my growing up years. Homosexual, lesbian, that was the beginning and the end of that story. Queer, maybe, whatever that meant. We didn't even know what it meant. It was a pejorative term you used to insult people. So can you conjure up a guess as to where the trans presentation begins from a pure biological point? Is there anything that you hang your hat on?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And I do know that with, more interest now in trans identity, a lot more is being done in embryology to find out if there are, certain influences during embryonic development that, might lead to this kind of outcome. But the short answer there is, I don't know. And the human brain is, let's face it, a very complicated and weird organ. So, all kinds of things happen in the brain.
Okay,
Very good.
Thanks.
Thank you. We have a question from Elaine Rice. What about some transsexuals claim that humans are not binary, that there is no such thing as binary?
I'm kind of trying to figure out the question. I mean, I would kind of agree with that the binary, seeing it as a rigid binary is just silly. In terms of gender presentation, as we know, people are all over the map, especially when they don't feel endangered. Yes. In terms of how they feel about themselves, it's possible. I mean, again, it's a little bit hard to tell because people are not free right now to express themselves. And so I think a lot of people don't actually know or just find it's much more comfortable to, they feel female enough or male enough and leave it at that and, don't worry too much. In terms of reproductive sex, humans certainly have the plumbing they have. And yes, there are some humans who are biological hermaphrodites. They usually like to refer to themselves as intersex. There are some humans who kind of like to change even, on almost a daily basis, how they present and how they want people to treat them. And I remember somebody telling me just recently about some coworker they had who, again, the whole question of order is kind of nice, where at work, he presented as Bob. And that just made it easier for everybody there. They knew who Bob was, and Bob acted like Bob. But then apparently when Bob got home, the person was all over the map. Some days they felt male, some days they felt female, and they did whatever they wanted to in their spare time. So, we'll see. Getting back to what the previous questioner, I forget his name, sorry, was saying, the whole business of even talking comfortably about being trans is so new. I mean, I do remember cases when I was a child. You may remember the name Christine Jorgensen.
Yes.
Who was a trans woman very, very, very early on. And she was very brave. And then after that, there was the tennis player, Renee Richards, who came considerably later than Christine Jorgensen. But there was still not a lot of real conversation around it. And what we are finding out more and more, now that we're kind of maybe able to look at history through a slightly different lens, is there was actually quite a bit of trans activity. And I would say it was among the people where it was just such a strong feeling that they couldn't put it aside. But, I remember reading about some resort, maybe on the Massachusetts coast or something like this, but where these otherwise, successful men who had families and businesses and what have yous would go off for, a week or two during the summer and be women. And so it's like it was always there, except that most people were closeted and probably a lot more people didn't even know what the heck was going on. So we're only finding out about a lot of that now. And the one thing, just as a reflection on this, is, you hear about in the past of, some wonderful, happy couple where one member of them committed suicide and nobody could figure out why. And of course, there are a million reasons for depression and the like. But I do actually wonder from time to time, how many trans women or trans men just finally couldn't keep it up any longer in previous eras.
I've been thinking some time about how so much of the transgender movement these days and when we talk about people not being comfortable in their bodies in the sex they were born with or whatever, it seems like a lot of that, and I think you've addressed some of this already. A lot of that has to do with society. A lot of that has to do with how accepting is society of a person that was born with a penis or whatever, acting like X, or someone who was, born able to bear children, acting like Y or whatever. And it strikes me as sad often that people, it's almost a reaction to the fact that society doesn't like me, having been born with this sex, acting in these ways, that makes people like me say, well, I will be better off by going through these operations and getting all this stuff done to me to become more of myself, sort of. That whole thing sounds sad to me. I mean, they're changing their physical arrangements so that they will feel more comfortable in society. Now, I don't want to stop anyone from doing whatever they want to do if that's, if they feel that's going to make their lives more comfortable. But it does seem to me sometimes that a better solution, if it was possible, would be for society to somehow become more accepting of people who were born in certain ways, just being able to be accepted those ways, whatever they're acting or dressing or whatever else. And that seems like it could make things easier for everyone. But anyway, just a comment or a question or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, that probably would make a huge difference to a lot of people. I have a feeling there are still some people who would just say, I want to look like a girl. And, they really would want hormone treatments and surgeries and so on, so as to look on the outside the way they feel on the inside. So I think it'd probably be some of both, but certainly more acceptance would be good.
I have a question and I think we have time. It's striking with for me the January 6th hearings where Liz Cheney has taken such a strong role in that, and her closing statement the other day when she, says that these brave young women who came forward, these brave young, the Cassidy Hutchinson and the young lady from this week, have been so brave, and they're being attacked by 50, 60, and 70-year-old males who are hiding behind executive privilege. And having grown up in a patriarchal society in the United States, that is so crumbling right now. I mean, that just sort of, to me, she took a hammer to that idea of a strong patriarchal society. And what do you see in the future as far as that the patriarchal society seems to be changing in our country and weakening, and also the idea of the Eve came first was kind of like.
Well, I think we're in a time of huge flux right now because, the women's movements have gotten far enough to be threatening.
Yeah.
And, civil rights movements have gotten far enough to be threatening, and demographics are changing enough to be threatening. And the rights of various different sexualities have, progressed far enough to be threatening.
Yes.
And I think that is one of the reasons why we're seeing the huge, ferment is kind of a nice word for what we're experiencing right now, but also the pushback and the violent responses. I mean, there's a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? Not pushback, backlash.
Backlash.
There's a lot of backlash going on right now. And, and they are powerful and they are organized, and who knows which way it's going to go. And I'm not comfortable with that. And, I hope that the right side wins. But I don't think anything is the outcome is not clear at this point.
Okay. Yeah, I feel the same way, and that it comes from fear. It comes from fear.
Well, it comes from lack of being able to dominate.
Yes.
I mean, you know, if women and blacks and people of color and various different sexual orientations get power, it is seen as a zero-sum game. That if they get more power, then, you know, other people have less power. And maybe that's true and maybe it's not. But what they would be losing absolutely is the ability to dominate.
Dominate. Yes.
And that's what some people want to do, and it makes them angry when they can't.
Yeah.
And the same thing actually goes for religion, that, you know, fewer and fewer people are identifying as Christian, and fewer people are identifying as religious at all.
Right.
And so again, there's this huge backlash amongst those who feel that their domination of society is endangered.
Dr. Hafer, I want to personally thank you for an amazing presentation. I loved it. It was very thought-provoking.
Thanks.
It's going to give me lots to think about for the weeks to come.
Oh, there's a ton of fun stuff in it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like the idea that it was part one. I hope you're willing to come back to us and do a follow-up that hopefully there's many parts to your wonderful presentations. This makes me so happy.